let's start here. So tell our listeners a little bit more about your tool, Wysper. What inspired you to start building it?
I was a product marketer. I was creating a ton of content. I was launching products. I was creating go-to-market strategies where kind of each pillar and channel rather stood on their own. And the content repurposing trend, I was working for an AI startup, AI writing startup, and I found the repurposing thing to be like what was most valuable for me and most valuable for the people that I was talking to. And I had previously working at that AI writing company, I worked for a company called Gong. They did call recording transcription, and their secret sauce was like for a long time, their transcription was the best that you could get. And then I saw some of these AI transcription models coming out while everyone was distracted by ChatGPT, and was like, how can I use this in my day job? And that was the use case that kept popping into my mind. And I was testing it out, building prototypes, and it worked. And so it just felt like this was right. And it kind of combined two passions for me, which was marketing, product marketing, content marketing, and podcasts. And so I've worked on, in parallel to podcasts and tech companies, and they were kind of just like stood alone as this channel that we built for brand awareness, and didn't really always know where it fit into the strategy, but it was cool. Everyone had one. We should do that. And I saw it as this opportunity to kind of shift the use and like strategic purpose of podcasts within marketing teams. So that's kind of how I got here.
That's interesting. So you mentioned that podcasting is a passion of yours. Are you an avid listener of podcasts?
I'm not in the arena, as they would say, right? Like I consume a ton of podcasts. I send episodes to all of my friends every week. I'm that annoying friend that's like, you need to listen to this 2.5 hour podcast episode when you just happen to have 2.5 hours. But I love to walk, run, cycle, and all those things. But my goal for this year is to start my own and find like the right topic to talk about and like provide value, not just like, start one to start one, because I'm running a podcast company. Instead, I'm spending more time engaging with other podcasters like yourself and getting on and getting involved in that way. So yeah, it's just, I find it as like to be an amazing medium for consuming and producing and sharing knowledge.
I was reading up on some of your LinkedIn posts, Greg. I follow you on LinkedIn, and folks that are listening to this podcast should follow you on LinkedIn as well. You talk about podcasts being a pillar or a source of content for companies. Can you expand on that point a little bit? What do you mean by a pillar of content?
A better way to describe it potentially would be the hub and spoke model, right? Like, I don't think that that's a revolutionary or a relatively new idea within marketing teams. Like, the concept of building an ebook and then breaking it down into a bunch of other content isn't something that's new, but doing that with podcasts is new. And there's a key like distinct advantage in podcasts versus like another medium like ebooks. And ultimately, to back up from that a little bit, it's like, podcasts are a fantastic way to build awareness in your market with your buyer. Let's say like 95% of these folks that aren't ready to buy yet. And you can spend a year like warming up the market, building your credibility and awareness. But in today's market, where a merciless CFO is looking at cutting marketing costs, when you're like, but hey, we're building awareness, like people love us, like they're not going to care. And so when you have the opportunity to take this thing that is amazing, is doing something priceless for yourself in the market, which is like building this relationship with your buyer, that's somewhat hard to quantify. You can then take that content that's trapped within that podcast and basically supplement all of the work you're doing across all of your other channels that do have pretty hard and steady metrics that you can measure over time and bring to your CFO and say, hey, we generated pipeline, we got this many more followers on these different channels, we generated this many free trials, whatever those metrics are for you from those tried and true channels, like your organic social, your newsletter, your blogs, your SEO, all of those things. You can supplement the work that goes into that and automate a lot of that content workflow by repurposing the effortless conversations like we're having right now, right? If I had to sit down and write out all the thoughts that I just like threw out there to you, it would have taken me like 5 hours, and I'd be like, no, that's terrible. No, that's terrible. Backspace. And they would, it's such a more difficult process, and that process belongs, right? Like, you need that, and you need creative thinking. But if you can just repurpose the ideas that you're already throwing out there and get yourself 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of the way there, you can save a lot of time over the course of a quarter.
To your point about the merciless CFOs, in my experience, podcasting fits really well into a sales-led organization. And podcast content makes for great sales enablement content. So if you're able to work with your sales counterpart and use that content to enable those sales conversations, maybe they're sharing a conversation with a prospect or an existing client, or an outstanding proposal to try to get movement, it can be a great way to kind of show impact on revenue in the early stages of a podcast, to kind of buy yourself some time for those top of funnel marketing activities to impact revenue.
Yeah, there's so many strategic reasons that you can tease out of a podcast if you just put a little bit more intention behind it. Like you said, it's great sales enablement. It's great account-based marketing where you bring on these folks that want to build their brand, but also happen to be your target buyer and dream account. And, in that conversation, they do their own discovery, right? And then your sales team is like, oh, these are their challenges. These are their aspirations. These are the things that keep them up at night. That's like all you need as a sales rep. It's like the dream. And then to take it a step further, I think it's super powerful at companies where you have your ICP within your company. Like at Gong, we sold to sales leaders, we sold to sales ops leaders. And so we would bring in our VP of marketing, our head of sales ops, like all these people that are buyers, and interview them for like 90 minutes. And we'd all have a chance to ask them questions. Like, take those conversations where you're kind of enabling your sales organization or just trying to help the broader company understand, like, what does the buyer really care about? And everyone in the company should know that. That's really important. And then just take that and turn it into the content you need, because it's going to resonate with your audience, because that is your audience. Those are the people that you want to get in front of.
Curious, in your experience, what other kinds of companies have you seen benefit from using a podcast as a source or a pillar of content?
I spoke to someone recently that was like ahead of the game, but they were doing it manually, which means like they had a podcast, they were brought in. It was kind of just checking a box, and they were given this as their one of their like key initiatives. And so they put a ton of time and energy into saying, like, how can we make this bigger, better, more strategic? And so they were taking that episode, getting just like a raw transcript, going through, editing that transcript and making it 100% accurate, and like formatting it better, and spending like a few hours doing that. And then they were putting it in like a format for a blog post, publishing that blog post, and then driving traffic to that blog post as a form of SEO. And we're able to boost SEO metrics dramatically over the course of a quarter, and like create more content because they were interviewing people that they would have been, producing case studies with, and doing all of those things that we've all done as marketers that are time consuming, sometimes challenging to like continue to have that funnel of content. And so they were able to just take the podcast and say like, hey, look, we drove all of this SEO traffic, and now that's our number one channel over the course of a quarter, which is something that would have been incredibly difficult. But the thing was that they were spending like 7 hours a week doing this for a single episode. And like the goal of working with them and getting them signed up was like, let's just see where we can save you 10%, 20%, 30% of your time, and like build that over time by integrating this into your workflow. So that's one area where they were like, they took this thing that they were already doing and made it a key pillar of their marketing go-to-market strategy for other channels that aren't going nowhere.
Well, what I like about Wysper is you log in, you upload an audio file, and then it produces a variety of different formats for you. So it produces a transcript, it produces timestamps, it produces sample tweets, a blog post, and it gives you that starting point. The example that you just gave about using transcripts to fuel SEO, that's exactly what I'm doing too. And it is laborious, right? What I like to do is chop up the podcast into video clips and then embed those on the page, and then take quotes from the transcript, use that as like a journalism style blog post, right? I contend that the introduction of ChatGPT and other generative AI models is it's like a race to the middle in terms of content production, and it's flooding the internet with almost kind of like the same regurgitated stuff. So a podcast can give you that human element that kind of differentiates your content. I'll step down from my soapbox. That's my take.
No, we are 100% on the same page. And I think that I'm the first person to tell people, like, you should not publish this content without editing it. Like, please don't. Like, I don't want, like, I'll refund you your money if that's how you're going to start using this, because I don't want to read that. No one wants to read that. And AI is just not there yet. I do think that it goes back to like my original, like, inspiration behind building this was that I think it is better at repurposing our own ideas than it is at generating its own when we prompt it, right? Like, if you give it content, it can restructure those thoughts into something that's still uniquely yours. Maybe sometimes it'll still use that like verbose language that is kind of like become like synonymous with AI writing, right? It's like over the top, but you can edit that out and spend, in that process that you just described. Like, even one thing that I find really useful when I'm producing content or working with clients is like, you go into the blog post output in Wysper and it gives you a pretty great breakdown of the themes that were discussed in that. And then you say, okay, this is the theme that I want to extract an insight from and produce evergreen content from it. Like, no one needs to know that this was even in a podcast. And then I go into the formatted transcript, I hit Command F, I search that key term from that like theme section in the blog post. And now I just like skim it for 10 seconds and find like a great quote. And now I have a block quote that kind of acts as the foundation of the piece that I'm going to write now. And like that whole little thing that I just did in 10 seconds would take me like, I would have to listen to the whole podcast or I'd have to like read through the entire transcript to find that point. And now I can do it without listening to anything. And that's just one small step. So it's those little things that I'm looking for.
The more time that you can save producing different formats and remixing and repackaging the content, it gives you multiples across all your different channels and the different assets that you're producing. So Greg, what are some of the other use cases for Wysper beyond podcasting? We've talked about podcasting ad nauseum, but there are definitely other ways to use this tool. I think it would be great for our listeners to understand some of those different use cases.
Yeah, so we briefly touched on one, which is like in interviewing your internal stakeholders. Like I posted about that the other day, which is like, are you stressed about creating content this year and you want to just kind of make Q1 way easier? Like, find 5 people in your organization that are subject matter experts at what they do, and then go interview them, get their buy-in, say like, hey, we're going to meet once a week, once a month, whatever it is, for an hour. And I'm going to interview you, take that, do that 5 times in a month. Maybe the first week you interview all these folks, if you want to structure it into a process. The second week, you kind of edit all of that down. The third week you review it with folks, and the fourth week you start publishing. And then all of a sudden now you have like a waterfall of content coming out. And that's one way to just kind of augment or supplement like the content creation process, fill your content calendar, whatever. The other one is webinars. I have people that only use Wysper for webinars. They don't have podcasts and they just want to get more out of, we've all made webinars. They can be really time consuming to produce. Like, you need to make the deck. You need to think about what you're going to talk about. You need to find the people that are the guests that are going to come on it. And you need to, keep your, think about how often you're asking your customers. There's a lot that goes into it. And then we post about it once on LinkedIn. We're like, all right, this is how many leads is generated, on to the next one. And you just kind of hope it works. But now you can take that and say, hey, this webinar now created the blog post for this month. It created the Twitter thread for this month, whatever it is. Or if you want to, like I said earlier, you want to double down on one channel, instead of creating 5 pieces of content for 5 different channels, create 5 pieces of content for one channel. It's all about your strategy. One of the most interesting ones I heard recently was customer interviews. So like very similar concept to interviewing your internal stakeholders, but instead you have like a customer advisory board. Your customer marketing team sends out, a bunch of emails every month asking for one-to-one interviews where they can ask about the value they're getting, the experiences they've had, or just like talking about industry trends, whatever it is. You can produce a variety of content. You don't have to just talk about your product. And then you can turn that into a blog series, into a LinkedIn post series. So basically anywhere you're recording content, you can upload that.
For folks that are listening to this interview right now, where can they find you?
Mainly LinkedIn right now. I spend some time on Twitter, but it's usually just dumb tweets, nothing to do with Wysper. So LinkedIn, and then you can reach out to me over email. My email's pretty widely available on the Wysper website, and would love to talk more about this type of stuff. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to find.
Excellent. Well, folks that are listening, go to wysper.ai. That's Wysper.ai. shoot Greg an email, give him a follow on LinkedIn.